Once you have data about what's happening in your field operations, you can really start optimizing them. And some of this is fairly obvious. If someone was able to do a ride along with every driver, you'd say, well, why are you taking that route? Or can we make that start of day, end of day process a little bit faster? It's only when you can see it at scale that you realize how much operational efficiency potential there is. And that happens across different companies in different ways because it's nuanced.
You're listening to McKinsey Talks Operations, a podcast where the world's C-suite leaders and McKinsey experts cut through the noise and uncover how to create a new operational reality. Each episode considers the challenges companies and economies are facing and the opportunities leaders can seize for competitive advantage. We'll look at how to connect boardroom strategy to the front lines, ways to increase performance, where and when to infuse operations with technology, and why empowering the workforce with skills and capabilities is key to success. Technology has been at the center of the supply chain evolution that has accelerated in recent years, with leaders investing heavily to digitize and automate their supply chains and related logistics. Enter generative AI. As one of the shiniest tools in the box, the much talked about technology has the potential to create a step change in supply chain efficiency. But with most digital investments failing to deliver value, supply chain leaders may be hesitant to make yet another significant gamble on tech. With me today are my colleagues Knut Alicke, author and leader of McKinsey's Supply Chain Academy in Stuttgart, Alberto Oca, co-leader of our digital warehousing practice in North America, and Asaf Somekh, co-founder of Iguazio, a leading AI and machine learning operations company acquired by McKinsey in 2023. And the clip you heard at the start of the episode was taken from an earlier conversation with Sanjit Biswas, who is the CEO and co-founder of Samsara. We'll hear a bit more from him later in our discussion. Since the launch of ChatGPT a little over 2 years ago, there's still a lot of excitement around Gen AI, but the technology also has been met with criticism that suggests that its potential and value is overblown. Knut, you've spent a lot of time exploring AI's potential with clients. What is your take?
Thanks a lot for having me, Daphne, and looking forward to an exciting conversation. Yes, we explored the space of Gen AI over the last 2.5 years. Every one of us was super excited or is still super excited. And what I would say is that people overestimate the impact of new disruptive tech in the short term, and they underestimate the new disruptive tech in the midterm or long term. For me, it's very clear that we are at a moment that is similar to the time when the container was invented. The container did completely change global supply chains, how they were operated, significantly increased the level of efficiency, made things possible that were not possible before. And what we see is that all of our clients are exploring. They try little things. They want to understand what's going on.
Fantastic. Thanks, Knut. And Asaf, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As you and your team built up Iguazio, it was very much on the premise of Gen AI's potential. Share a little bit of what you're seeing in your work with companies today.
Actually, I see it as more of an evolution that we're seeing. Obviously, AI has been around since the 50s of the 20th century in its different ups and downs and different variations. When I was in university, I was building my own models with functions without the nitty-gritty tools today that automatically creates models. But it was there and it evolved. And as a company that has been focused on AI for the past 10 years, the acquisition happened after we were 8 years as an independent company. And obviously focused on AI, we work with clients that do AI. We did see companies across all industries in certain parts of their operation implement AI. As Knut said, it was at the time machine learning based, deep learning based, whether it's on manufacturing production lines, switching to computer vision based quality assurance, improving dramatically the yield of the production line. If we're seeing other examples on the back end of banking, on the operational side, we see it across different areas. What Gen AI did, it's like a leap from the previous generations of this technology. In certain areas, AI wasn't good enough to actually provide the value that was expected. And now we see that it actually opens up many, many more opportunities. And I think what's more intuitive to all of us is related to languages and the quality of chatbots and co-pilots that really changes the way many professions are operating.
And Asaf, what about when you think specifically about the supply chain context?
The focus we see right now is around production pipelines. It's basically, if you look at more in the advanced manufacturing spaces, the companies that deal with equipment that is using technology like silicon and very, very advanced technologies there, this is where visual inspection of humans is not as good as what AI would offer. This is where we see a lot of focus of people changing that and also doing it at a larger scale than they experimented with machine learning and deep learning in the past. And a very important thing to say about it, not everything is Gen AI. And this is part of the education we're doing with clients. We're telling them some things are good enough with machine learning. And if you think about Gen AI, sometimes Gen AI is given the compute resources it involves is expensive. And therefore, we always recommend to people to think about creating an environment that combines with traditional AI like machine learning, deep learning, and wherever needed, this is where you would also deploy Gen AI. So keep that environment, keep that flexibility. And in distribution networks, we see a lot of attempts to actually apply AI in terms of efficiency of routes and things like that, adjusting the skills of the people, whether it's technicians that are supposed to fix a specific problem, to make sure in advance that they're actually creating a route for them that addresses their skills. And I think the sky's the limit in terms of the ideas for use cases in this space.
Got it. And Alberto, welcome. Let me bring you in here. What are some of the immediate use cases building on what Asaf was talking about there?
Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure. And that's right. Gen AI is really revolutionizing the logistics industry and is poised to boost performance and unlock trillions of dollars in operations, with roughly 190 billion with travel and logistics and 18 billion in supply chain operations, like Asaf was saying. So the way it does it, it is because Gen AI offers value creating opportunities across the entire logistics operations value chain. And this ranges, from what we call core operations. And Daphne, this is basically planning and optimization, warehousing and transportation, asset maintenance, etc., to support functions like procurement, customer experience, back office, legal, HR. So what Gen AI does in a nutshell is enhancing various aspects of the value chain and leveraging advanced AI models to create new content, optimize processes, and improve efficiency across logistics operations. The benefits are impressive. As an example, Gen AI can significantly reduce the lead time for production documentation by up to 60%. This includes auto-generating and consolidating shipping documents, identifying potential mistakes, suggesting corrections, and reducing human errors and workload for logistics coordinators by 10-20%. That is unbelievable if you think about it.
Yeah, it kind of reduces the admin burden, right? So there must be the speed in getting to the right information is a huge benefit as well.
Exactly. And another one, which is also getting a lot of attention, is virtual dispatcher agents. This one is about automation and optimization of the dispatching process with Gen AI agents that augment dispatchers to assist drivers with troubleshooting, roadside assistance, etc. And another example, right? So we one of our clients, right, who was a last mile operator with a fleet of more than 10,000 vehicles. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of brokers, for instance, can relate to this. This led, to $30 to $35 million in savings, which is pretty significant. And again, also with a minimum investment, in this case, 2 million. So, and another one which I think is also important, and this one is less on the transportation, is more on the warehousing side, is this virtual SME, which is a chatbot that, to your point, synthesizes findings from multiple systems and responds to managers' specific contextual questions. So basically, what this SME or chatbot is doing is helping, right, with activities that sometimes are basically just transactional, and is helping, enhancing those or aiding with those activities in a way that enhances the overall transformation and optimization of the performance. And then last but not least, and this is one that I would say stitches a little bit of together, is more from a customer experience, right, in the delivery space with copilots, which we also have talked about. And this one is the three-way messaging platform that leverages GenAI and the standard SMS text messaging, like the ones we have with our phones ourselves as customers and consumers, to connect the drivers, the dispatchers, and customers in a single text conversation to improve efficiency and instantly resolve delivery-related issues. And again, if I may share another example, with another carrier that we work with that had more than 150 vehicles, this led to $3.5 million in savings.
So essentially, logistics is an amazingly exciting space for some of these opportunities. Let's now have a listen into a conversation that we had recently with our guest from Samsara.
Let's start with safety. One of our customers and partners for many years has been DHL. We work with their DHL Express division and their supply chain division, and they care tremendously about the safety of their frontline. They have thousands of delivery drivers working every single day. They operate in all different kinds of weather conditions, all times of day. For them, making sure that frontline is safe is paramount. They already had safety coaching and safety programs, but they were lacking some of the operational data and context. In other words, what was going on out on the road? Were there things like mobile phones distracting their drivers, notifications, those kinds of things? And could they basically be safer? They put our technology out in the field 4 or 5 years ago and immediately saw a reduction in the number of events that were happening out on the road. So they got into about 26% fewer accidents when they measured year over year, and they're operating at massive scale. Some of those accidents that they were able to prevent were the most severe. So their costs were actually cut roughly in half, 49% reduction.
I just love hearing about all of these very practical applications and the immediate return in value. Knut, I wanted to come back to you. We've been talking quite a bit in the last few minutes around logistics and distribution. What about in the front of the supply chain?
We worked on a very interesting example in order management. So if you think about a situation where the order dispatcher has bottlenecks, so there's multiple people in order management, each of them is responsible, so to say, to deliver the products to 1 out of 4 customers. And if you have a bottleneck, what then happens is that you kind of prefer one customer over the other. And that is often something that is grown-up rules, that is not necessarily well documented. And what we did is we used the GenAI engine to talk to the order manager, to the individual people, multiple of them. And the idea was, hey, first to find out that is their rule set consistent? And we found out, no, it's not consistent. Is it following the company strategy? And it was not following the company strategy. Then we asked the GenAI engine to discuss with the order manager and to give feedback. And we asked the GenAI engine to optimize and to do basically, in this bottleneck situation, an allocation that would follow the company strategy, which was maximizing the EBITDA. And there was one customer out there, there was a growing customer, and to prioritize that customer. And that was quite interesting to see this multi-level reasoning, how well this applied. And with this, that let us think of, hey, isn't it that we have GenAI, so to say, as a team member? Isn't it we have a new colleague that is now the GenAI engine, and that colleague needs to be trained. So we need to give the business context. We need to make sure that we give feedback on the decisions. And with this kind of getting better and better and better in the environment that we have. And this is a very interesting application going forward.
I love that. So in fact, what you're doing is you're teaching the bot to give advice so that the action is accurate first time.
Exactly. And with this, in this interaction with the planners, we also get all the knowledge and the experience. So the implicit knowledge of the planner, we get this out into kind of a standardized process. We make this explicit. And this might sound boring, but if you think about if there's a new team member coming to the team, that's exactly the same process that you would go through. So you would be trained. And with this, you would then be able to define kind of, hey, that is a standard procedure. Here we are following, here we're not following. So it's enhancing, and here it's improving the performance.
Yeah. And then actually, when you come back to that, so what you're changing the process workflow, if you like, and how much of that is intuitive to the teams that are working, and how much of that requires formal training and skills enhancement?
The teams basically talk to the GenAI engine very intuitive. You need to overcome the first hurdle of talking to some machine where people think that, oh, it's a black box. What does this black box do? But then if you feel that the feedback is good and the questions are good and the challenges are good, then you would accept this. And that is also what we saw, that people kind of got more into it and then also understood that their local decision was not the best decision.
Yeah. And obviously, there are always going to be groups in the workforce who are curious and who are keen to learn and keen to use these tools and fine-tune the tools. Is there a danger that there's a group of folks, that a segment of the workforce that's going to be left behind?
Definitely. We have the typical planner, I would say, is 30 years with the business, still knows how to use a fax machine. And we need to convince these type of people. And we can only do that if we tell them that your knowledge is super important, that we train the Gen AI engine. And with this, we can improve. So everyone is interested to improve the system itself. But here we need to make them curious to try out and to play with the engine. And with this kind of getting more into detail. So very important to use it. Curiosity is core and center.
Thanks, Knut. It does feel like there's a lot to consider, especially given the perceived cost to implement this technology successfully. But it feels like it doesn't have to be complicated. Is that right, Alberto?
Yes, Daphne. I think, as you said, right, it doesn't have to be really complicated. And actually, it doesn't have to be a huge investment. You heard the examples that I provided before for the use cases, right? A lot of these investments were like $1 million or even less. I think the focus should be on creating a strong foundation that they can build upon. And I think the most important thing is, what is that foundation that you need to build on? And then how you expand on that foundation. I have to say that right now, companies are investing early in Gen AI, are building capabilities to gain a competitive advantage. They focus on identifying high potential use cases like the ones we're discussing, understanding priority opportunities and risks like the ones that Knut was talking about, and determining the necessary capabilities to capture the value. In my opinion, my recommendation for supply chain leaders is that they also will need to think about, as we're also touching on this, the workforce transformation, the workforce of the future. The adoption of Gen AI in logistics specifically can lead to changes in the workforce dynamics, and with a shift towards more value-added tasks and reduced manual workload. So we'll have to convince the people that have been really using a fax machine like Knut was talking about, to run now, shift gears. Identifying, and this is, I think, also very important, identifying and prioritizing the use cases to prove the value of Gen AI will be very critical. There's going to be a lot of skepticism, and this is going to be very important. So this should be followed by also a proof of concept that can prove the technical feasibility and estimate the business value. Then I think you can start on moving into the typical MVPs, so minimal viable products and scalability across the business. Then keep in mind that Gen AI won't solve all the company's problems. It's just a digital enabler for organizations, for the business processes and the operations.
Yes, Alberto, that sounds exactly right. And Asaf, I wanted to bring you back in here as well, because obviously this is also about the tech architecture and the kind of underlying platforms, and how should organizations and the CIO be thinking about upgrading and ensuring that that tech platform is robust so that these new Gen AI applications can really fuel value.
Let me build on what Alberto just said about that foundation that Alberto was referring to. We actually call it the AI factory. And the reason when you say AI factory is that you want to build repeatable stuff. It's not just like one attempt here, one MVP here, one POC here. And the fact is that Gen AI turned POCs and pilots to be even easier than before, because I don't know if you had the chance to see demos that students are doing without any data science knowledge. Within hours, they have amazing applications. But then taking a Gen AI application to production at scale that performs and is robust 24/7 is a completely different story. And this is exactly where we're working with CIOs and creating the right foundation. Now, before the foundation, there is a misperception on many tech executives that if they're running and they're not like the most advanced cloud users, there is no way they can use Gen AI. And this is completely wrong. We're actually working a lot with companies that are either self-regulated or because of regulatory requirements, they have to work on-prem. And we're working with them and to build AI factories that provide exactly the same capabilities that they would get in the cloud with all the fancy features that you get from the OpenAIs and Microsoft and the Amazon of the world when it comes to Gen AI. And this is a misperception that people should be aware of, that this can be built completely on-prem. The technology is there. And in fact, most of my team's time right now is working with companies that are implementing hybrid architecture where most of the, let's call it, the high impact applications are actually implemented on-prem because this is where the sensitive data sits. And therefore, this misperception should be dealt with. So that's one thing. When it comes to building the infrastructure, it's not enough just to get to a working application that is accurate. I've seen clients that eventually built an application that they were happy with the accuracy of it. And again, a GenAI application. If it's GenAI application, when you run it, eventually you're using GPUs. And GPUs, as people may know, are these days hard to find and are also quite expensive, whether it's the physical GPU to acquire for your on-prem infrastructure or even GPU hours that you're running within the cloud vendors. Those are pretty expensive. So people build that application and then they actually need to do the math. How many instances of this application that I'm running now need to happen every hour, need to happen every minute or every second? Sometimes you're talking about really high volume applications. And then they realize that the cost structure is so high that it doesn't justify the value that it brings. And this is where we've seen many projects get stuck on. And this is where the right architecture needs to be in place. It should take into account how to use those GPUs. There's actually a big gap in the industry right now. We'll talk about talent later, but one of the areas that we see a huge gap is when it comes to how to use those GPUs. I mean, getting it to do what you want is one thing, getting it to do at reasonable cost is a completely different thing. So this is an area where we actually focus a lot of our work with clients these days. And at the end of the day, you want to create this AI factory in a way that on one end is centralized because you want to make sure that in production, you know which models are running and do you have like any exposure when it comes to it? What exactly is happening right now? Is there actually something happening with the data that will require us to actually retrain or adjust the model in a way? Things like that should be centralized. There are many new risks associated with Gen AI that some people treat it only intuitively and therefore are doing stuff on-prem. But there are many techniques today to address those risks, and they should be actually combined with the ability to scale these applications to put in place those guardrails. So this is on the running at scale. At the same time, when people are developing applications, you want to actually provide the framework that eventually will flow into the production environment and won't end at the MVP. We see many projects that get to the MVP and they're saying, well, we proved the value, and now what? And then they realize that that application that was built will not be able to scale, whether because of cost, whether because of architecture.
Got it. And it has to almost be a forethought rather than an afterthought, right, Asaf?
Completely right. Some people actually say, well, we will bring that factory when we're ready for scaling. No, you won't be ready for scaling if you don't bring it now. I mean, you will have to actually go back several steps in order to fix your problems that will allow you to scale. So bring it in early as possible. It will pay off eventually dramatically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like the supply chain leaders who are embarking on or exploring what Gen AI can do for their function, they're going to be benefiting from being very deliberate, right, in their assessment of where and when to use tech. I know that most companies are still in the very early stages of their journey in Gen AI. Perhaps I'm going to ask each of you to paint a picture and a vision of what will be possible down the line. Asaf, I'm going to start with you.
There's always hype in any new technology. I think the thing is that Gen AI actually made it all the way to all consumers as opposed to a classic B2B technology. And therefore, the hype is like out of the roof. But like any technology, there is a hype curve. And as we said before, initially there's a perceived value that eventually there's some disappointment, but in the long run, there'll be a lot of value. So start with that. And again, from our experience with working with clients, sometimes people are overexcited with great ideas on use cases. Typically, the list starts with 100 use cases. but there need to be some order and structure. And this is where we encourage people to actually go by domain. And this is where we see better successes. Focus on a domain. Within that domain, implement multiple use cases. And then, because there is no just one use case for something, there are many elements to it that eventually complement each other. And this is where the value comes. And from my perspective, what we see right now happening is that the domain, and we talked about Copilot several times in this session, we see it across all industries. And I believe that in supply chain, it will be used a lot, basically improving the efficiency of the current workforce. And of course, keeping those that are stronger in adopting technologies and making them more efficient. You will be able to actually use a smaller workforce once it's becoming more efficient. And I think for the near future, we will see a lot of all of these assists that improve the processes along the way. And down the road, we will see all those autonomous applications. Another hype term these days is agentic AI. And we see in different industries how we're actually building teams of agents that work with each other to complete repetitive jobs. We will see that come into supply chain too.
Okay, and Knut, what is your vision of where, I suppose the sky is the limit, right? What do you see as the future?
So we heard already a lot of great use cases from Asaf and Alberto. So if we think about the current landscape that we typically find at our clients, where we have multiple ERPs, multiple planning systems, Excel systems, and so on, and to have an Gen AI to encapsulating all of this and then being the natural interface to making sense out of planning decisions, out of data, out of historical data, that will really boost performance of supply chains. As I've already mentioned, that agentic AI, I think, is indeed the next level. So if you just think about kind of, hey, we are now in an exploring phase, then we give recommendations and we are able then to take decisions. So kind of play that back into the systems, place an order, do a production order, transfer stock. So that will be further enhancing. And what is necessary, I can just kind of say that, hey, be curious. That is what we often hear. Don't wait for the use cases of other companies or your competition. Get started. It's a new topic. There are no use cases out there that exactly fits your need. So be curious, try out, and with this learn. And then whenever you see a high impact use case, work and scale it fast.
Love that. Alberto, anything else to add to the picture of the future for supply chain and logistics?
Not a lot. I think my colleagues, Asaf and Knut, already painted a picture. What I will just say is the future of Gen AI in supply chain management is so promising. And specifically, what we have seen and we continue to see, and it will continue to happen, right, is the potential that it has to significantly enhance efficiency, decision-making, and operational performance. So by acting as a co-pilot and a smart intermediary, I think, Gen AI definitely is poised to augment the existing planning systems that we've talked about, automation of processes and repetitive tasks, like Asaf was also describing. And I think even more important, right, provide valuable insights, which ultimately will transform the supply chain landscape. However, and similar to automation, which has been a hype in the last years, I think it is important to recognize its limitations and ensure that it complements rather than replaces human expertise and traditional software solutions. That would be my 2 cents in addition to what we just discussed, Daphne.
Lovely. Thanks. That's a really nice thought to finish with, Alberto. It's clear that Gen AI isn't going away and that there's really value on the table to be captured. But what I'm hearing from all of you is that having a deliberate approach with thought and being really clear about objectives, probably a unified approach across the senior executive bench there. I want to thank each of you so much for this wonderful discussion, and special thanks to Sanjit Biswas for an equally engaging conversation. You can listen to his full interview in the show notes below. This topic, I'm sure we'll come back to it, but thanks very much for being here. Thank you, Knut.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks, Alberto.
Thank you, Daphne.
And thanks, Asaf, for keeping everything real when it comes to IT.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you all.
You've been listening to McKinsey Talks Operations with me, Daphne Luchtenberg. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Another great episode starts now.